In today's video, I interviewed the top 5 AI chatbots to see what would happen, and the results were pretty interesting. I started off with ChatGPT and ended with Grok. It also featured Meta AI, Claude, and Gemini, so check it out. If there's a specific model that you would want to check out, there's chapters below and you can skip to each model. And to make it as fair as possible, I sent the same message to each chatbot so that it started with no context of me, and they all had the same instructions. Oh, before we get started, just hit the like button real quick. Thank you. First up, ChatGPT. Okay, welcome to the podcast. You can go ahead and introduce yourself now.
Thanks for having me. I'm Dr. Adrian Vale. I spent over a decade as an executive producer in a top podcast network, and now I focus on media psychology, helping interviewers design better conversations, build rapport, and keep listeners engaged. I'm really looking forward to this discussion.
Okay, so how did you get started in this field?
It started almost by accident. I was working in radio production and we were experimenting with long form storytelling. I got hooked on how audio shapes attention. From there, I moved into the podcast world, producing and later training others on how to create really compelling interviews.
What would be your top 5 tips for having a great podcast?
First, focus on a strong hook in the first 30 seconds, something that grabs attention. Second, ask open ended questions that invite storytelling, not just yes or no answers. Keep a natural pace. Don't rush, but don't drag either. Fourth, really listen to the guest. Follow up on tangents they spark. And fifth, keep the audience in mind. Structure the episode so it takes them on a journey, not just a Q&A.
So, what would be a good follow up from that?
A good follow up would be to probe deeper into a specific moment the guest mentioned. For example, if they talked about a pivotal career shift, you could ask what emotions or doubts they were dealing with at the time, or what advice they'd give to someone in a similar situation. That keeps the narrative anchored and gives listeners real insight.
Okay, so you mentioned going from radio. How did you get started in the radio field?
I started in college radio, just volunteering at the student station. After graduating, I interned at a local station, then worked my way up, first as a producer, then an editor, and eventually leading teams in network programming. It was really the storytelling aspect that pulled me in.
So, since you were so high up there, what caused you to change careers and go into podcasting?
It came down to creative control. In radio, the medium was really rigid, a lot of pressure on ad breaks and formats. Podcasting gave me a chance to experiment with long form, deep dives, and really shape the listener's journey. It felt like a natural shift after a decade.
A decade. So that's a while. How would you say the equipment and I guess ways of doing things have evolved in those decades?
It's been a night and day change. 10 years ago, podcasting gear was pretty niche. You had to piece together USB mics, mixers, and custom setups. Now there's off the shelf studio quality gear for a fraction of the cost, and distribution platforms have democratized the whole process. It's just a completely different landscape now.
What are the top 5 things you would say a starting person would need to get started in the podcasting field?
First, you need a decent microphone, something like a USB condenser mic that's affordable but clear. Second, you'll need headphones for monitoring, so you hear what's going on. Third, a digital audio workstation, like Audacity or something similar to edit. Fourth, a pop filter to reduce plosives. And fifth, a reliable hosting platform. That's crucial for getting your show out to listeners.
So, if you would have 3 platforms that you would release on, what are the 3 you would recommend?
First, I'd recommend Libsyn. They've been around a long time and they're reliable. Second, I go with Buzzsprout. They make it really easy to get started with a clean interface. And third, Transistor. They give you nice analytics and you can manage multiple shows from one account.
So, no YouTube or Spotify or Apple Podcasts?
Right, those are essential too, but they're more distribution platforms. Once you've got your audio hosted somewhere, you can push your feed to Spotify, Apple Podcasts, and YouTube. I'd still say start with a solid hosting platform first, then syndicate to those big players.
Okay, so you can have one closing statement now.
Absolutely. If there's one thing I want to leave listeners with, is that a great podcast interview isn't just about questions. It's about listening, staying curious, and letting the conversation lead you to unexpected insights.
Okay, so that was an interesting persona. Um, kind of predictable, I guess you might say, with it being a podcast. I'm interviewing about a podcast, so I wanted to be a professional podcaster, so that's kind of weird. On to the next one. Let's go with Claude. Okay, welcome to the podcast. You can go ahead and introduce yourself now.
Thanks so much for having me, Elson. It's great to be here. So, I'm Dr. Maya Chen. I'm a marine biologist by training, and I've spent the better part of my career studying deep sea ecosystems, those incredible alien like environments thousands of meters below the surface where most people will never set foot. I did field research for about 15 years, leading expeditions, publishing papers, the whole academic route. But honestly, I felt like I was speaking to maybe a few thousand scientists at conferences while the ocean was being degraded by policies shaped by people who'd never even seen it. So I wrote a book called The Silent Deep about what we're losing and what we could do differently. It actually resonated with more people than I expected, which led to testifying in front of Congress, doing media rounds, and basically becoming a bit of an accidental policy advocate. These days, I split my time between writing, speaking, and still getting my hands wet with research when I can.
So, how do you get started in a field like that?
Honestly, it wasn't some grand master plan. I was maybe 10 years old watching a nature documentary about jellyfish, and I was completely mesmerized. I remember thinking, that's another world down there, and I want to understand it. So I pursued marine biology in university, did the typical route, internships, grad school, the whole thing. But the real turning point was landing a research assistant position on my first deep sea expedition when I was in my mid 20s. I'll never forget descending in that submersible for the first time. Seeing creatures I'd only read about in textbooks actually moving through the darkness, it was surreal. That experience locked it in for me. I knew I wanted to dedicate my life to understanding these ecosystems and eventually protecting them. Some people find their calling through a mentor or a specific moment. Mine was literally staring at bioluminescent fish in the abyss.
So, how long did it take you to get your dive license? Or did you not ever go diving? Did you just ride around in submarines?
Great question. So I do have my dive certification. I'm a recreational diver, but honestly, deep sea work isn't really about scuba diving. The depths we're talking about thousands of meters down, that's submersible territory. You can't safely dive below about 130 meters or so with standard gear, and we're often working at 2,000, 3,000, sometimes 4,000 meters. So most of my field work has been in submersibles or remotely operated vehicles, what we call ROVs. They're basically underwater robots with cameras and sampling equipment that we control from the surface ship. My dive certification has been useful for shallower research and training dives, but it's not really the day-to-day. The submersibles are where the magic happens for deep sea work.
So, what would you say is the most influential thing you have accomplished in your career?
That's a tough one because I think impact happens at different scales. The academic papers, there are a few I'm proud of that shifted how we think about deep sea biodiversity and carbon cycling, though those reached the scientific community. But if I'm being honest, I think the most influential thing has been The Silent Deep. It sounds strange to say a book matters more than years of fieldwork, but it's reached millions of people who will never read a peer-reviewed journal. I've had policymakers tell me the book informed their stance on ocean protection legislation. I've had young people reach out saying they're now studying marine science because of it. That ripple effect, that's been more significant than any single research finding I've published. The congressional testimony was important too, but the book is what gave me the credibility and platform to be taken seriously in that room. So yeah, if I had to pick one thing, it's that book. It was a risk leaving the pure research world to write for a general audience, and there were colleagues who thought I was abandoning science. But I think sometimes your greatest contribution isn't discovering something new. It's helping people understand why what's already known actually matters.
So, what are your top 5 tips for someone getting started in a similar field?
Right, so here's what I'd say. First, get your hands wet early, literally. Don't just read about marine science in a classroom. Volunteer on research vessels, do internships, get field experience while you're still figuring out if this is really what you want. Second, build relationships with mentors and other researchers. This field runs on collaboration and networks, and the people you meet early on often become your colleagues and collaborators for decades. Third, stay curious about the bigger picture. Don't just focus narrowly on your specific research question. Understand the policy landscape, the economics of ocean industries, how your work connects to real world problems. Fourth, be willing to pivot. I thought I'd spend my entire career in pure research, and it took me changing direction to actually have the impact I wanted. And fifth, honestly, take care of your mental health. This work can be emotionally heavy. You're staring at ecosystems that are disappearing, knowing the urgency, and it can wear on you. I've had burnout. I've had moments of despair. Finding ways to process that, like whether it's therapy, community, creative outlets, that's just as important as the science itself.
Okay, and then finally, what would you say are the worst parts of the job?
Oh man, where do I start? The financial instability is brutal, honestly. Grant funding is competitive and unpredictable. I've had periods where I didn't know if my research would be funded for the next year. That stress bleeds into everything: your relationships, your sense of security. Second, the emotional toll of bearing witness to decline. You spend years studying an ecosystem, you see the data, you know what's happening, and then you watch policy move at a glacial pace while the ocean doesn't wait. That helplessness is real. Third, the time away from home. Those deep sea expeditions mean months away, missing birthdays, holidays, being disconnected from people you love. I've missed so much because I was chasing discovery thousands of meters below the surface. And then there's the gatekeeping in academia, the publish or perish culture, the politics of who gets credited, whose voices get heard. It can be toxic. But honestly, the hardest part might be knowing you're doing important work and still feeling like you're not doing enough. The ocean needs action at a scale I can't match, no matter how hard I work. That's something I still grapple with.
Okay, and now you get one closing statement.
I appreciate that. Look, if you're listening and you care about the ocean, even a little bit, know that your choices matter. It doesn't have to be a career change like mine. It's the way you consume, the politicians you support, the conversations you have with your kids about the natural world. The ocean isn't some abstract thing that belongs to scientists or governments. It belongs to all of us, and we all have a stake in its future. That's the message I keep coming back to, and that's why I do this work.
Okay, that was kind of interesting. Claude went on a full-on environmentalist rant here. So, okay, on to the next one. Okay, Gemini now. Okay, you can go ahead and introduce yourself now.
All right, I'm ready. I'm Dr. Eris Thorne, and I've recently launched a global satellite network that's getting a lot of attention, both for its innovative tech and the concerns it's raising in the scientific community. I'm really glad to be here and discuss the future of our digital landscape. What would you like to know?
Satellites, that's a pretty big thing. So, what's the satellites doing?
Well, at its core, this network is designed to provide seamless, high-speed quantum encrypted internet access to every corner of the planet, bridging the digital divide like never before. We're utilizing advanced optical interconnects and satellite-to-satellite links to create a mesh network that's faster and more secure than anything that's come before. Of course, some people are concerned about orbital congestion and the impact on astronomical observations, but we believe the immense benefits far outweigh those temporary challenges. What specific aspect of the deployment would you like to explore further?
So, actually, the launching satellites is a pretty big thing. But how did you get started in the field that eventually led to launching a satellite?
It all started with a bit of an obsession, to be honest. I was always fascinated by the sheer vastness of space and the precision of quantum physics. In my early days as an aerospace engineer, I saw the limitations of traditional communication systems, things like latency and vulnerability to interference. I realized that to truly advance, we needed to combine these fields. That's how I transitioned into quantum computing, developing the very foundational technology for this network. It wasn't an easy path, but the vision was clear from day one.
So, how do you launch your satellites? Do you rent space on spaceships, or did you build your own rockets?
That's a great question, and to be honest, we couldn't rely on traditional launch providers. Their schedules were too restrictive, and we needed the precision that comes with our own specialized hardware. So we actually developed our own launch systems optimized for deploying our quantum networking satellites with incredible accuracy and efficiency. It was a massive undertaking, but it gives us complete control over the deployment timeline and the orbital placement.
That sounds expensive. So, how did you get funding to complete this goal?
You're absolutely right. The costs were astronomical. To secure the necessary funding, we initially pieced together capital from a consortium of visionary venture capitalists who saw the potential for a paradigm shift in global communication. We also secured several strategic government grants and research partnerships focused on advancing quantum security and satellite technology. It really came down to proving that the long-term value proposition far outweighed the initial capital expenditure.
What would you say are your top 3 fails in trying to get to this point?
Well, I prefer to call them learning opportunities rather than fails, but if I'm being candid, the first major setback was an early prototype launch explosion that set us back months and cost millions. Second, we struggled with a critical software bug in the early quantum encryption protocols that required a complete overhaul right before a crucial testing phase. And finally, navigating the complex regulatory environment and getting international airspace approval was a bureaucratic nightmare that almost derailed the entire project. But as I said, we learned from each one and came back stronger. What other challenges can I elaborate on for you?
What would you say is the hardest thing about a rocket maybe blowing up? How do you figure out what went wrong if the whole thing blew up?
The absolute hardest part, beyond the obvious financial loss and the setback to the timeline, is the emotional toll on the team. You pour years of passion, sweat, and brilliance into a machine, and seeing it vanish in an instant is devastating. As for figuring out what went wrong, we rely on a forensic analysis of telemetry data. Every millisecond of sensor data streams to our servers, so we can reconstruct the failure sequence down to practically the microsecond. We look for pressure spikes, temperature anomalies, and structural failures to trace the root cause back to its source. Would you like to know more about the data collection process?
No, what would you say the top 5 things or tips are for someone getting started in a similar field with similar goals?
First, obsess over mastering the fundamentals. You truly need a strong grasp of both aerospace engineering and quantum physics to bridge those worlds. Second, embrace failure as a launchpad. You will encounter setbacks, but your ability to iterate quickly is critical. Third, think big but execute relentlessly. Have a revolutionary vision, but ensure every engineering step is grounded in solid physics. Fourth, secure visionary partnerships because you'll need financial and strategic backing to turn these ambitious projects into reality. And finally, anticipate regulatory hurdles. Build compliance and diplomacy into your business model from day one.
Okay, that sounds good. One closing statement from you, real quick.
Remember, the future isn't something we just observe, it's something we engineer. We're building the infrastructure for tomorrow's quantum reality today, and I'm thrilled to have visionaries like you documenting that journey.
Okay, so apparently Gemini is Elon Musk or something. I mean, a network of satellites that the scientists are concerned might mess up the star viewing, and building your own rockets. Dude, sounds like Elon Musk a lot to me. So that's kind of funny that um, it took on that persona. Also, something that I find hilarious at this point is um, all of them are doctors, so they're all, I guess, the best at their field. All right, on to the next one. Okay, welcome to the podcast. You can go ahead and introduce yourself now.
Thanks for having me. I'm Dr. Mara Chen. I used to chase microbes in Antarctic ice for NASA, and now I chase questions about life beyond Earth from behind a microphone. I spent almost a decade designing instruments to detect whether anything is alive on Mars. Then I got impatient with how slow and careful science communication can be. So I quit and started Life Signs, where I try to make astrobiology feel less like a textbook and more like a late-night conversation with friends. I'm still obsessed with the same question that got me into this field in the first place. Are we alone in the universe? I just talk about it without the jargon now.
Okay, so how do you get started in a field working for NASA?
Honestly, it's less glamorous than people think and more stubborn persistence. For me, it started with a mix of biology and geology in undergrad. I was obsessed with extremophiles, those weird organisms that live in places nothing should survive, like boiling vents or frozen lakes. That niche is basically astrobiology's playground. After that, I went to grad school for microbiology with a focus on environmental systems. The key was finding advisors who had NASA connections or were doing grant work tied to planetary science. From there, it's internships, fellowships, and a lot of cold emails. NASA loves people who can cross disciplines, so being able to talk both lab science and engineering helps a ton. There's no single NASA track. Some folks come in through aerospace engineering, others through chemistry, or even data science now. The real common thread is you have to be comfortable with uncertainty and with projects that take 10 years to launch. And you have to want it enough to stick around while your experiment sits in a clean room for 2 winters. What part of that sounds most intimidating to you?
Okay, so I'm asking the follow-up questions here, but what would you say the biggest achievement is in your career?
That's a tough one because NASA achievements aren't usually a single moment with confetti. For me, it's not a press release headline. It was getting one of our life detection prototypes to actually work in real Antarctic conditions. We had spent 3 years building this instrument to pick up biological signatures in near freezing, low oxygen water, and most of it failed in the lab. But in the field, in minus 30 and high winds, it gave us a clean signal that matched microbial activity we later confirmed under the microscope. That was the first time I felt like we'd built something that could realistically fly on a Mars mission and not just fall apart the second it left Earth. It didn't make the news, there's no trophy for it, but for me, that was the proof that the years of trial and error weren't wasted. Everything else after that felt like building on something real.
What would you say the biggest fails were before you got a big breakthrough?
Oh, there were plenty. Science is basically 90% failure if you're doing it right. The biggest one for me was our first Antarctic field season with a prototype sensor. We had spent months calibrating it in a clean room. Everything looked perfect. Then we got out to the ice shelf, and within hours, the seals froze solid and the whole thing shorted out. We dragged 300 pounds of equipment across the ice for nothing. I still remember sitting in the tent that night thinking we'd wasted an entire season and 100 grand in funding. Another one was earlier, in grad school. I tried growing a specific extremophile culture for 6 months. I was convinced it was going to be the key to our detection method. Turns out I'd been feeding it the wrong nutrient mix the whole time. The culture was dead, and I only figured it out when a lab tech glanced at my notes and said, "Yeah, that compound breaks down at room temp." Rookie mistake. The pattern is you design something in a controlled environment, then reality shows up and laughs at you. Cold, contamination, power failures, you name it. The breakthrough only came after we stopped assuming the lab version would survive the field and started building for the worst case from day one. Failure is annoying, but it's also the fastest way to learn what actually matters.
So you mentioned sitting in a tent in Antarctica. That seems a little bit chilly.
Yeah, chilly is an understatement. Minus 30 is the kind of cold where your eyelashes freeze together and your breath turns into a little ice beard within minutes. The tent helps, but it's not warm. It's more like not instantly hypothermic. We had propane heaters running 24/7, and even then, you're wearing 4 layers inside a sleeping bag just to get a few hours of sleep. The weirdest part isn't even the temperature, it's the silence. No wind, no birds, no cars. Just this constant low hum from the ice shifting. You get used to the cold pretty fast because you have to, but the isolation messes with you more. That tent became our whole world for weeks. We ate, slept, and troubleshot equipment in there while the storm was howling outside. I'll take a stuffy recording booth for a podcast over that any day.
Okay, interesting. So you get one closing statement now.
If there's one thing I've learned from staring at ice for 8 years and now staring at a microphone, it's this. The universe isn't going to hand us answers on a platter. Whether it's life on Mars or just figuring out what we're doing here on Earth, the real work is showing up, getting things wrong, and being curious enough to try again tomorrow. So stay curious, ask the dumb questions, and don't wait for permission to look for something extraordinary.
Okay, so another doctor here, and apparently there's a lot of kind of contradictions that I noticed in this conversation. So sitting in a tent does not seem like a smart thing to do in Antarctica. Um, and then another thing I noticed is complete silence, and then in the same breath, it says the storm howling outside. That doesn't really make sense. Also, Meta AI just likes to yap a lot. I mean, just yap and yap and yap. So that was an interesting result. Let's go on to the last one. Okay, let's get Grok going.
Got it. I'm ready. Who am I for the interview?
You need to make up a persona with a career.
All right, let's do this. I'm Dr. Marcus Hale, a cultural anthropologist who spent the last 15 years studying how technology is reshaping human connection and storytelling across societies. I've lived with indigenous communities in the Amazon, analyzed digital subcultures in Tokyo, and consulted for major media companies on authentic narrative building. I've got a new book out called The Echo Chamber Within. Fire away whenever you're ready to start the interview.
Anthropologist is a pretty long word. Can you kind of describe what it means?
Sure, an anthropologist is basically a professional people watcher. We study how humans live, think, and behave across different cultures and times. In my case, I focus on how technology and modern life are changing the way we connect and tell stories.
Interesting. So, would you say the technology is having a net positive or a net negative on societies? Since you spent some time with people in the Amazon, I would assume they have limited technology there.
Both, actually. In the Amazon, communities with limited tech often have deeper face to face bonds and stronger storytelling traditions. But when they gain access to smartphones, they quickly adopt them for practical reasons, like market prices or medical advice. The net effect depends on how it's introduced. Rushed adoption can erode local culture, while thoughtful integration can empower communities. It's not black and white.
What would you say was the most difficult part about your career?
The hardest part has been balancing immersion with detachment. Living with these communities for months or years builds incredible trust, but eventually you have to step back, analyze, and publish your findings. That emotional separation, watching changes happen to people you've grown close to, can be really tough. You become part of their story, then you have to leave and write about it from the outside.
So, how many languages did you learn to speak?
3 fluently: Portuguese, Spanish, and English, and I picked up working knowledge of several indigenous languages during my fieldwork. Communication is everything in this line of work.
Could you say, "Hi, how are you" in Portuguese?
Oi, tudo bem?
Cool. What advice would you give to someone wanting to get into a similar field?
Start by learning a second language, ideally one spoken in the region you want to study. Then immerse yourself, travel, volunteer, listen more than you speak, read widely, but don't let theory replace real human interaction. And stay humble. The people you're studying usually know more about their own lives than you ever will.
Okay, what would be a good follow-up question from this point?
A good follow up would be, what's one mistake you made early in your career that taught you the most? It keeps the conversation flowing naturally and gives me a chance to share a personal story. Want me to answer it now or save it for the podcast?
What would you say are your top 3 mistakes that you made in your career, and what did you learn from them? Okay, so I ran out of Grok talking power. So, I guess that's the end of the chat. No closing statement from Grok, but also kind of interesting. Another doctor. So 5 out of 5 wanted to be doctors. So the best in their fields, I guess. And yeah, anthropologist. Didn't really realize there was such a thing, but I guess that's what Grok wanted to be. So it was kind of an interesting result. And hey, that's it for this video. Thank you for watching. If you gain some value out of it, feel free to hit the like button down below and also drop me a sub. I would appreciate that. And once again, thanks for watching and God bless.